Hello, everyone. Welcome to World History Virtual Style. I know this is all new to us. Some of your other teachers may have already started doing this, but we're going to try our best to get through some lecture. Hopefully, you have the ability to look at the PowerPoints and kind of go back and forth. Since this will be on YouTube, you can pause, go over and read, look at your PowerPoints, go to the online book, whatever you need to do to be able to pick up the information as we go through it. I'm sure this will be rough initially and then probably finally as well. So, but it's what we're working with, so we're going to go with it. Okay? We are in chapter 14. We'll start off in lesson 1 for today and try to go through it as best as we can. I'll follow along with the PowerPoints. So if you have those pulled up or the ability to go back and forth, we'll go with that. Okay? So chapter 14 starts off talking about the land bridge that existed between Asia and North America, roughly from northeastern Russia to Alaska. And it was during the last ice age. And it was a natural land bridge that still exists today. It's just underneath water. So during this time, you have roving bands of native, what we call Native Americans, but they're actually people from Siberia, northeastern Russia, or the Asia area, and they are following, as they did at that point in time, any kind of livestock or wild game or anything like that. They would follow those groups of traveling animals to continue to be able to feed themselves. And so they're following herds of bison. They're following caribou, different kinds of large game, and they followed them across this ice bridge, this land bridge, from northeastern Russia to Alaska, which is in what we call today North America. So around 1000 BC, farming villages started popping up all along the eastern woodlands, the land in eastern North America, from the Great Lakes area all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. And so you have to imagine they have traveled from what is today modern-day Alaska across the northern part of what is North America, Canada, and then down the eastern side of our North America continent. So they are in the Great Lakes region. They are following what ends up being called the Mississippi River, and they are going down and following these roving bands of animals. Okay, and so eventually, they're a group of people we call the Hopewells. They develop in the Great Lakes region, and they migrate down the Mississippi River. And this group of people, Native Americans, ends up building what we call mounds, mounded tombs, usually, not always, but usually in the shape of animals. More often than not, we see them in the form or shape of a snake. They use these, and this is on your PowerPoint, second slide, to relay basically a connection with nature and the nature gods and the people that have departed, usually a high-ranking person that has departed, and they're trying to connect those people with the afterlife. Okay? During this time, these Hopewell people, these mound builders, actually came into Arkansas. And so if anybody's been able to go to the Parkin archaeological site, which is just a little bit southeast of us, I believe it is. I'm terrible with geography. I don't know why, but I am. There's an archaeological state park there where these people, and there's mounds. pretty cool stuff if you've ever been able to go, if you're a history guy or girl, which I am. Hernando de Soto actually came through Arkansas in the 1540s and actually had visited what became Parkin State Park, and came into contact with the Indians that were there at, I believe it's Casqui. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce the word. Casqui is the name of the Indian city that was there. A lot of times during when they're in these mound buildings, small towns would actually be erected around these mounds, and so they would almost be the form or the center of activity for that group of people for a while. So what we have is these mounds, we have these cities, and so they're establishing permanent settlements or semi-permanent settlements. And so during this time, they're stopping following these roving bands of animals, and they are starting to establish growing crops and things like that. And what are some of the reasons for them to do that? Well, as we all know, what do we do over here in Northeast Arkansas? We farm, right? And the reason for the farming and along the Mississippi River itself is because the soil deposits and everything from the river itself being extremely good and very rich for crops. And so these people actually shifted to full-time farming, okay, and around 700 AD, and became a very prosperous community. Lots of trade, being able to go up and down the Mississippi River. Cities started to appear, bigger cities started to appear, 10,000 people or more, which is a big city for those days and age. Okay, a place called Cahokia, which you'll see in your book, is established around what is modern day East St. Louis, Illinois. Not Missouri, but East St. Louis, Illinois. 98-foot burial mounds. These are big things. Base larger than the base of the Great Pyramid in Egypt, which is pretty large. I've never been to Egypt. It's on the bucket list, but from what I understand, pictures don't do it justice. The Great Pyramid is massive. Okay? So Cahokia is flourishing. What are some of the things that they're growing? Well, they're growing corn, they're growing beans, they're growing squash. These are the three sister method. Basically, they would plant squash in the ground, and squash grows under the ground. Then they would plant the corn and the corn stalk, and then they would plant the beans, and the beans would actually wind its way around the corn stalk, and the corn would be there. So basically, you had these three sisters. The squash is growing from underneath, the corn is growing up, and the beans are wrapping themselves around. So we have the three sister method of growings. Okay, so northeast of the Mississippian culture were some Indians, Native Americans called the Iroquois. The Iroquois lived in these villages of dwellings called longhouses, and I actually did a Iroquois longhouse diorama when I was in, I feel like it was 7th grade. It's been a very long time ago, I know, but it was awesome. And basically, these longhouses, these houses that they had multi-generational families in them, sometimes more than one family, but they were just a large, long, rectangular dwelling with a roof, with a pitched roof and all this kind of stuff. And then around that, they would have a fence, basically. And so it would be protection, both from the elements and from outside invaders, animals, whatever it may be. Okay, each longhouse had wooden poles covered in bark, 150 to 200 feet long, very big structures, and housed either a large extended family or up to even a dozen different families. So The Iroquois, now you have to understand, they're not just farming. Farming is their main source of food and trade, but obviously they like to eat some meat too. So the Iroquois men are going out, they're hunting deer, they're hunting bears, yes, bears, not lions, tigers though, but caribou, small animals, different things. They're fishing, rabbits, beavers, you name it. There are all kinds of things they got going on out here. They're warriors, they're protecting the community. There's all kinds of things going on in these modern day Iroquois civilizations, okay? Wars are common, so they are, it's just how it is, man. They fight each other like we do today. They had a grand council that met to try and settle disputes between the clans of the Iroquois that were there. The group of Iroquois that lived in what is modern day Pennsylvania, New York, southern Canada. These groups fought a lot, and this is where the Grand Council came in and started settling disputes among those groups. Okay, and sometime during the 1500s, the Iroquois people were nearly torn apart by warfare. At least that's what the legend says. A lot of elders presented themselves and tried to settle disputes, and one guy in particular, and I'm not even going to try his name, Dig and Wada. Okay, he's an elder. He tries to settle and say, hey, we got to do some peace stuff here because we're killing each other big time. Okay, and one of the group, one of the peoples from that group that listened to somebody that you've probably heard of before, a person named Hiawatha. And Hiawatha is a member of the Onondaga tribe. And between these two became a time where they actually stopped everybody from fighting and warring, and became as the Great Peace among the Iroquois people. And these groups then formed a large group. You hear my wife yelling at my kids? That's what we got going on. An alliance of these groups, of 5 groups, and they called the Iroquois League. A council of representatives of 50 Iroquois leaders, known as this Grand Council, met regularly. They settled disputes. They were chosen in a special way. Each Iroquois group was made up of clans or groups of related families. Okay? Moving along the PowerPoints here. And the women of each clan singled out a well-respected woman as the clan mother. So big ups to the clan mom. And then the clan mothers then chose the males to represent them at the Grand Council. So it was a big responsibility for those guys. Patience, firmness, tenderness for all their people, calm deliberation, all this kind of stuff. I don't think there's a pause button on here, so you may see a show here in a minute. You never know what's going on at the Collins house. All right, so moving along. One thing we need to talk about is the fact that, and we need to establish the fact that they hunted buffalo big time. They used every aspect of the buffalo. They ate meat. Hey, shh! I'm recording a video over here. Hey, stop. Social distancing. All right, get back to it. We're talking about in your book. It's on page 276. The Great Plains, the West Mississippi River Basin, the Plains Indians. They're planting beans, their corn, their squash along the rivers, and these Plains peoples are using buffalo. Okay, and they're killing the buffalo, but they're using every aspect of the buffalo itself. They're eating the meat. They use the skin to make their teepees, for cloths, all kinds of stuff. What? What's the problem? I'm recording a video. Can I help you? What? Teepees. All right. So, Southwest covers the territory of what is now modern-day present New Mexico. Arizona, Utah, Colorado, those states are a group. Dry conditions, sufficient rain in some areas, and a group of peoples establish a farming community or civilization there, and these people are called the Anasazi. So, do you need something? Do you? Okay. Stop staring at me.
I wasn't.
I don't believe you. So between 500 and 1200 AD, so we're what, about 800 years ago, from 800 to 1500 years ago. The Anasazi are using canals, they're using dams, they're using all these different kinds, and they're actually building a very complex, elaborate civilization. A couple different places that they established. There's the Yeller. I'm filming a video over here, and we got World War III going on upstairs.
Maybe I can't get out with your car like that.
Where are you trying to go?
I'm totally going to pick up their stuff.
What stuff?
Their school stuff. Their food.
Does it have to go right now?
I have to be there before 12:30. And that's why I was getting them ready.
It's an hour. Give me 10 minutes to finish this. Maybe. If I keep getting interrupted. We'll try to fly through. We got a couple pages left. Okay. The best thing you can do is just read the book. All right. I'm going to need everybody to go upstairs so I can get this done.
Well, again, I told them to come downstairs because we were leaving. Go back upstairs. Your dad's not ready for sleep.
Communication, folks, is the key to any successful relationship. If one person doesn't know what the other person is thinking or doing, you have conflict within the household, especially after being home with each other and all three kids and the dog and everything else for, what are we going on, 3 weeks now? It's awesome. Okay. So these Anasazi, they're building dams, they're building canals, they're bringing water into the desert to farm their farming places, their crops. Okay, they're skilled at basket weaving, they're skilled at making pottery. These Anasazi are very well known for these things, and also for their housing that they built into the side of cliffs. Okay, they built these pueblos out of sun-dried clay bricks. They're pretty good at what they're doing here. Built a large complex at a place which is called Chaco Canyon. It had about 800 rooms. Eventually, unfortunately, they're going to have to completely abandon their civilization, their region, their complete area after droughts, constant droughts that happen over a term of many years. Luckily for us, bad for them, but luckily for us, their civilization or their towns and things like that, whatever we want to call them, survive to this day. So if you're able to go out to the Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico area, you could actually visit the Anasazi housing complexes and things like that. Really cool stuff. If that, once again, if that's something you're into. All right. So as we're moving down the western part of North America, we get to a group of people we call Mesoamericans. This is the area of Mexico in Central America. And we get into a couple people that you've probably heard of, a couple people groups you've probably heard before, called the Maya, and then the Aztec and some Toltecs and some other people like that. Okay, but this Mayan, who we're talking about first, this Mayan civilization flourished from around 300 to 900 A.D. And they were a very, very advanced civilization as far as building and architecture and things like that. They built massive, massive temples and pyramids that survive to this day. Another bucket list item for if we ever get back to normal after this thing would be go to Central America and go to the Aztec and the Toltec and the Mayan ruins and see what they actually built with no, what we know of today is no modern day equipment or mathematical tools or anything like that. They built by hand these massive stone structures. Very, very cool stuff. The Mayan were if you're looking geographically, is that a word, geographically? If you're looking, it's down the Yucatan Peninsula. Okay, they unfortunately, I'd say, for them, start to decline around the year 800 A.D. I know that really condenses what the Maya are into a very small segment of a lecture, but that's just where we are in the book, and that's how it goes. We don't know why that their civilization declined. It could have been a bunch of different things, or a combination of multiple things. It could have been drought. It could have been war. It could have even been volcanic activity, or even overuse of the land, which led to nutrients being taken out of the soil too fast and not being able to replenish, and then their crops don't grow anymore. So there's all kinds of different things. And whatever the reason, the Mayan cities were abandoned, covered by dense jungle growth, and we didn't even find them until what is the 1800s, the 19th century. So they stayed hidden for 1,000 years, and nobody knew about these things in the dense jungle growth down there until 100 to 200 years ago. Pretty crazy stuff. Very recent as far as history goes. Now, their cities were built around this massive central pyramid, topped by a shrine that was to their gods. They had different nearby temples and palaces and things like that. A sacred ball court, which would, let's just be quite honest with you, how they played ball. They hit it with their hips and their legs into a hoop that was actually up on the side of a wall. And sometimes the ball was made out of the heads of somebody or a group a warrior from a different group that they had conquered. Pretty crazy stuff. All right. Some scholars, experts, believe that there could have been more than 100,000 people living in these urban centers, like Tikal, which is in present-day Guatemala, things like that. Now, their civilization was composed of, this is another slide if you want to move on over, what we call city-states. These city-states were often at war with each other. Again, the Maya are no different from the Aztec or the Iroquois or anybody like that. They came and they fought amongst themselves quite often. You had a hierarchy, a hereditary ruling class that each city-state was governed by. So you had these group of what we would call kings nowadays. We call them kings that kept it within the family, and so the ruling would be passed from son to, from father to son, and so on, and so forth. Okay. Now there's a city that we need to get to called I don't know if it. Let me check out my slides. It's been a couple days since I made them. Okay. So no, it's not on there, but we'll talk about it. Okay. There is a powerful city-state. This is in the book if you want to read along. Powerful city-state called Palenque. Palenque. There's a ruler called Pakal the Great. Now, he claimed to be descended from the gods, as did all the other Maya rulers. The rulers were supported by these nobles. The nobles had a class of scribes. There may have been priests, all kinds of different hierarchy of way that people went along these things. Okay, within Mayan society, besides the ruling class, the scribes, the priests, and all that kind of stuff, then you had the peasants, the townspeople. These people worked as skilled artisans, officials, merchants, the normal everyday folk within the town. Okay, most of the Mayan peasants were farmers, as it was back in the day. They lived on these tiny plots or terraced hills, which you would see at some place called like Machu Picchu, the terraced hills. I've showed you pictures of that before in the highlands. Their houses were built of mud brick, which is called adobe, and thatch on the roofs that have sticks, and they would put the thatch on top of the roofs, and it would be their household. Okay, there was a fairly clear-cut division of labor between men and women. Men did the fighting and hunting. Women provided the homemaking, the raising of the children. They had, I guess, fairly defined gender roles within their society. Women also made the cornmeal, which was their basic food for much of the population, which is just made from grounding up corn. The Mayas also cultivated cacao trees, okay, which is the source of chocolate, cacao powder. And this was used as a beverage by the upper class. So the upper class got to drink chocolate milk or whatever they drank, chocolate water, chocolate something. Either way, it was the beverage that they drank. Crucial to this Mayan civilization was its spiritual center, their perspective on their relationship with their gods. So for the Maya, all life was in the hands. I'm trying to move along make sure that you get information that's on the PowerPoint. I did skip over the thing where they talked about the enemy soldiers being used as slaves. That's on there. That nobles and leaders were used for human sacrifices. I was going to get into that in a little bit, but there's a pretty cool picture of them ripping out a guy's heart. I believe I showed you a video of how that was done there towards the last days of school when we were still in with their obsidian blades. Pretty cool stuff. So here we are. All life was in the hands of these divine powers. The name of their supreme god was Itzwamna, okay, which does not look anything like how it's spelled, which is Itzamna, Itzwamna, and that translates to us roughly as lizard house or the great lizard. Gods were ranked in order of importance. Some, like the jaguar or the god of night, were evil rather than good, and so they had a good versus evil relationship with their gods as well. Just like you had when we were talking about the Greeks and the Romans, you had Zeus, and you had Hades, the good and the bad. You had Jupiter and Mars, the good and the bad, the god of the sky and the god of war, and things like that. So they practiced human sacrifice. My PowerPoint jumps around a little bit. Basically, this sacrifice is to appease the gods. So anytime that they would go to war and they would conquer a different group, they would have prisoners of war, they would bring them back, they would sacrifice them to the gods as a thanks for helping them win the wars. Here's a very interesting thing that they did. They actually wrote on bark, modern precursor of paper. They would fold it like an accordion, this bark. They would cover the outside with a thin plaster, and then they would use these as basically their recording instrument for any kind of writing that they needed to do. And we actually have 4 of their books, or whatever you want to call them, that survive to this day. They also used a bunch of different mediums like clay. They wrote on jars. They wrote on jade. They wrote on bone. They wrote with slate. They wrote with any kinds of things. Okay, shells, stone monuments, you name it. They wrote on it. So we have a lot of examples of Mayan writing that exist to this day. Now, we didn't understand though the writing for a very long time, centuries as it were. Then we had some discoveries where scholars figured out that a lot of the passages contained symbols that were recorded dates, which were in the Mayan calendar. Okay, and this calendar, known as the Long Count, and we just had this happen in 2012, I believe it was in the Mayan calendar, ran out, and everybody thought that the world was going to end. This calendar, called the Long Count, based on cycles of creation and destruction. According to the Mayan, our present world was created in 3114 BC and is scheduled to complete its downward cycle. Thank goodness it didn't, but it was scheduled to on December 23rd of 2012. So we're 8 years past our death and destruction time, according to the Mayan. Okay, the Maya used a couple different ways for couple of different ways of measuring time. One was based on the solar calendar. This is on your PowerPoint. And the solar calendar is 365 days. So we're talking about these guys got it on point. And the other was a sacred calendar, which was only 260 days long, divided into 13 weeks of 20 days each. So only trained priests could read and use that calendar, the sacred calendar. These priests used mathematics, and the number 20 included a symbol for zero, which was the completely new symbol in terms of writing or mathematical use up until that point in time. A lot of the Mayan hieroglyphics recorded important moments in history among the Mayan. Again, the most important place for Mayan hieroglyphics is at Palenque, which is where Pakal the Great ruled over. Okay. There's a really cool thing. If you need to watch the documentary over Pakal the Great, if you're bored, and you're going to have plenty of time in the next 4 months. Basically, there's a picture of Pakal, and he's reclined, and he's looking into what looks like a telescope type thing. Obviously, something that didn't exist at that point in time. His hands and feet are on these different levers, and if you take the big guy with the poofy hair, I think his name is Giorgio or whatever you want to call it, but it's the aliens guy, you know what I'm talking about? He says that Pakal may have been an astronaut or an alien because of the way this spaceship looks. And then they've even done a modern day recreation of what it kind of looks like, and it kind of looks like he's got his feet on levers to control some sort of instrument or spaceship or something like that. Pretty cool stuff, pretty interesting stuff. Okay, tell you what, we're going to stop right there. We're 30 minutes in, and I know you're tired of me rambling. Tomorrow, or what is today, Monday? Wednesday, when it's another even or odd day again, we'll finish out lesson 1 with the Toltec, the Aztec, a bunch of different political structures and things like that, religion and culture among those two groups. Then we'll move on to lesson 2, and after that, I'm not sure how they expect us or want us to test and things like that, if they even want us to test and things like that. But we'll have a few more assignments and then move on to chapter 15.